The ring wasn't hers. The veil wasn't hers. Even the name she would carry out of that church, Harwick, had belonged to another woman first. Delia stood in the vestibule of St. Augustine's on a Thursday morning in October, holding a bouquet of white chrysanthemums that someone had chosen without asking her, and she thought, this is what it looks like when a family runs out of options. Her sister Rosalind had seen to that. It had started, as most disasters did, quietly, a rumor. Then a letter that arrived at the wrong house at the wrong time, and was opened by the wrong hands, their fathers. And by the time the full shape of it became clear, Rosalind had already left for Baltimore, with a man whose name no one was permitted to say at the dinner table. She had not written. She had not apologized. She had simply gone, the way water finds a crack and pours through it, indifferent to what it ruins on the way down. What she left behind was a broken engagement to Mr. Harwick, a ruined social season, and a family name that had developed a smell. What she left behind specifically was Delia. Cordelia Ashford was 24 years old and had, until that October, lived a life of deliberate smallness, she read. She helped her mother manage the household accounts. She attended the dinners and the garden parties that were required of her, smiled at the right people, said very little, and had cultivated the particular skill of making herself easy to overlook. It was not a talent she had chosen so much as grown into, the way ivy grows into the shape of whatever wall it finds. Rosalind had always been the one people looked at. Rosalind was brilliant and reckless and beautiful in the way a fire is beautiful. You couldn't help but watch, even knowing it would burn you. Delia had loved her for it, mostly, resented her for it sometimes, grieved the particular loneliness of standing in someone else's light for so long that you forgot you had edges of your own. And now Rosalind was gone, and Delia was standing in a vestibule in a borrowed dress, about to marry a man she had spoken to exactly 4 times. Her mother appeared at her elbow. "You look pale," she said. This was not a compliment. "I'm fine. You need to stand straighter." Delia straightened. Her mother adjusted the veil with the brisk efficiency of a woman hanging curtains. There was no tenderness in it, but there was precision, and Delia had long since learned not to ask for the first when the second was being offered. "Mr. Harwick is a good man," her mother said. She had been saying this for 3 weeks, in different arrangements, the way you keep turning a key in a lock that won't quite open. "He is respected. He is established. He has agreed, which is more than we had any right to expect." What she never said, but what lived in every room of their house like furniture no one talked about, was, "Your sister ruined us, and you are the repair." Delia knew this. She had known it from the morning her father had come downstairs with Rosalind's letter in his hand and looked at Delia across the breakfast table, with that particular expression, not cruel, just calculating, the way a man looks at the assets remaining after a loss. She had not argued. She was not sure she had the right to. Mr. Harwick, Nathaniel, she was supposed to call him now, though the name still felt like a coat that didn't belong to her, was waiting at the altar with the stillness of a man who had made a decision and intended to honor it, whatever it cost him. He was 36. He had dark hair going gray at the temples and a face that was not unkind, exactly, but was the face of a man who had learned to keep things behind his eyes. His first wife had died 3 years ago, consumption. They had been married 7 years, and people who had known them said it had been a genuine thing, a real marriage, not the kind arranged in parlors between families running calculations. Delia had heard this from Mrs. Fenwick's daughter, who had told her with the particular generosity of someone delivering bad news, gently. "He loved her very much, you know. It may be difficult for him." Delia had thanked her. She had gone home and sat with that information for a long time. The ceremony was brief. The minister spoke about union and covenant and the duties of the married state. Nathaniel said his vows in a clear, even voice that gave nothing away. Delia said hers, and was surprised by how steady she sounded, as if some other, calmer version of herself had stepped forward to handle the formal parts, while the real Delia stood slightly to one side, watching. When it was done, Nathaniel looked at her, not through her, which was what she had expected, but at her, which was something different. It lasted only a moment. Then he offered his arm, and she took it, and they walked out of St. Augustine's into the pale October light as Mr. and Mrs. Harwick, which was, Delia thought, a sentence she would need a great deal of time to make sense of. The house was in Aldersham, 2 hours by carriage from her parents' home in the city. Large, well-maintained, and arranged with the comfortable severity of a place that had been managed by a competent person for a long time. There was a housekeeper named Mrs. Colton, who had clearly adored the first Mrs. Harwick and regarded Delia with the polite watchfulness of someone waiting to see if the new arrangement would hold. Delia did not blame her for it. She was watchful too. The first weeks were careful. They were unfailingly polite to each other, in the way of people navigating a shared space without a map. Nathaniel was at his offices in town 3 days out of 5. He came home in the evenings, ate dinner, sometimes read in the study, sometimes sat in the parlor while Delia worked on her correspondence or the book she was usually pretending to read. They talked about practical things, the household, the weather, an article in the paper that one of them had found interesting. It was not unhappy, it was not anything quite. She found herself studying him, in the small moments the way you study a painting in a dim room, waiting for your eyes to adjust. He was precise but not cold. He had opinions about things. The management of the estate, the current state of the railroads, a particular question of municipal policy that he'd apparently been arguing about with his business partner for the better part of a year. When something interested him genuinely, his face changed in a way she suspected he wasn't aware of, a small easing, the careful arrangement going briefly slack. She did not know what he thought of her. She was not sure he'd had enough occasion to form a thought. She was quiet, and he seemed to take her at the value of her quietness, which was almost more uncomfortable than being misread. One evening in November, she was at the writing desk when he came in from the study and stopped in the doorway. "Are you writing to your family?" "To a friend," she said. "In Philadelphia." He nodded. Then, after a pause that felt like he was deciding something, "You had a life before this, I'm aware of that." Delia set down her pen. "So did you." Something shifted in his face. Not quite surprise, but something adjacent. He had expected, she thought, the careful deflection, the polite rerouting. She wasn't sure why she hadn't given it to him. "Yes," he said, "I did." And then quietly, "I'm not asking you to pretend otherwise. About your own." She didn't know what to say to that. So she said, "Thank you," which felt inadequate, and was probably not what either of them needed, but he accepted it with a small nod and went back to the study. And Delia turned back to her letter, and found she had completely lost the thread of what she'd been writing. The letter from Rosalind arrived in December. Delia knew it was from her sister before she opened it. She recognized the handwriting, that particular looping confidence of a person who had never been taught to doubt the worthiness of her own expression. She sat with it unopened, for nearly an hour, at the kitchen table while Mrs. Colton moved around her with careful incuriosity, before she finally broke the seal. Rosalind was in Baltimore. Rosalind was well. Rosalind had, apparently, spent several sentences establishing these facts before getting to the point, which was that she wanted to come home for Christmas. She missed the family. She missed Delia. She was sorry for the trouble she had caused. This was offered in a single compact sentence, the apology of a person who knew it was required and had fulfilled the requirement efficiently, and she hoped that things had settled. She hoped Delia was getting on well with Mr. Harwick. She hoped everything was fine. She did not ask if it was. Delia read it twice. Then she folded it and put it in her pocket and went for a walk in the winter garden, where everything was bare and dormant, and the ground was hard underfoot. And she stood there for a while doing nothing in particular except breathing the cold air and waiting for her own feelings to clarify. What she felt, eventually, was this: tired. Tired of being the thing that was sorted out. Tired of Rosalind's disasters arriving like weather, something you couldn't prevent, only endure. Tired, most precisely, of the way her family had looked at her across that breakfast table. Not with love, exactly, but with relief. We can use you for this. She had loved her sister. She still loved her sister. Those two things had managed to coexist for years, and she didn't see why they would stop now. But she was done, she thought, standing in the frozen garden, being the softer ground that absorbed Rosalind's impact. She went inside and sat at the writing desk and composed a response. It was civil. It was honest. It said that Rosalind would not be welcome at Christmas. Not yet. And that Delia would explain this to their parents. And that when Rosalind was ready to speak plainly about what had happened and what she intended going forward, Delia would be glad to hear it. She sealed the letter. She addressed it. She set it with the outgoing correspondence, and felt, for the first time in months, that she had done a thing entirely on her own terms. She did not expect Nathaniel to notice. He noticed. He found the envelope the next morning before Mrs. Colton had taken it, picked it up without thinking. Habit, she supposed, a man used to managing correspondence, and saw the name on it. He set it down carefully and looked at her. "Your sister wrote, yes. Are you all right?" It was such a simple question. She had been asked it in the past months by her mother, who meant, "Are you managing?" By her friend in Philadelphia, who meant, "Is it terrible?" By the minister's wife at Sunday services, who meant, "Are you grateful?" No one had asked it, she realized, the way Nathaniel just had, with the actual shape of the question intact, as if he genuinely did not know the answer and was willing to wait for the real one. "I don't know yet," she said. He nodded, as if this was a complete and reasonable answer. "She wanted to come for Christmas. I told her not to." A pause. "That must have been difficult to write." "It was easier than I expected," Delia said, which was true and also not the whole truth, but it was what she had available, and she offered it as honestly as she could. He looked at her for a moment with that same expression she had started to recognize, the brief unguarding, the face behind the careful face. "For what it's worth," he said, "I think it was the right thing." She hadn't asked for his opinion. She also found, somewhat to her surprise, that she was glad to have it. Christmas came and went without incident, which was itself a kind of gift. They had her parents for 4 days. Her father formal and approving, her mother making careful inspections of the household with an air of professional assessment, both of them conspicuously not mentioning Rosalind. Nathaniel was a competent host. He was attentive without performing it, which Delia suspected her parents noted and approved of, which in turn made her feel something complicated that she declined to look at directly. On Christmas Eve, after her parents had retired, Nathaniel poured 2 glasses of brandy and offered her one, and they sat by the fire in the parlor, and for the first time since October, they were not being careful in quite the same way. The house was quiet. The fire was warm. There was something about the particular combination of late hours and low light that loosened the tight management they had both been sustaining. "Tell me something," Delia said. She wasn't sure why she said it. He looked at her over his glass. "Something, anything real." The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile but the suggestion of one, the shadow a smile leaves before it arrives. "That's a significant request. You don't have to." He looked at the fire for a moment, then, "I didn't want to do this," he said, "in the beginning. The arrangement. I want you to know that, not because it reflects on you, but because I think you're aware of it and I'd rather say it plainly than have it sit between us." She held very still. "My solicitor suggested it," he continued, "after your family made the approach. He thought it was a sensible resolution. I thought," he paused, "I thought I was done, after Catherine. I didn't think I had another attempt in me, at any of this." Catherine, his first wife. She had not heard him say the name before. "What changed your mind?" Delia asked. He turned to look at her. "I met you." She waited for the qualification, the practical addendum, the reasonable explanation of what he meant by that. None came. "We spoke 4 times before the wedding," she said, careful, "I know. But people are legible if you pay attention." He set down his glass. "You were terrified and you didn't let it show. You were angry about the situation, and you were managing it anyway. And when my solicitor made that insulting remark about the circumstances of your sister, you looked at him with such precise contempt that I thought, this one knows exactly what she thinks. She just doesn't say it." A pause. "I found that interesting." Delia stared at him. She had no memory of making such a face at his solicitor, which meant she had been less controlled than she'd believed, which was in equal parts mortifying, and obscurely a relief. "I didn't know you saw that," she said. "I see most things," he said. "I just don't comment on them unless it seems useful." She thought about that. She thought about the 4 months of careful dinners and careful evenings and careful conversations, and whether he had been as present in all of them as she was now beginning to suspect. "What do you see when you look at me now?" she asked, and was surprised by her own directness, the way you're sometimes surprised by the sound of your own voice in an empty room. He was quiet for a long moment. "A woman who is considerably more than the solution to someone else's problem," he said, "and who has not yet, I think, been given much cause to believe that." The fire cracked and settled. Outside, it had begun to snow. Delia looked down at her brandy glass, at her hands around it, at the ring she still thought of as slightly foreign. Then she looked up at him. "I wrote to my sister because I was tired of being managed," she said. "By my family, by circumstance. I was tired of being the one who absorbs the damage and doesn't say so." "I know," he said. "I'm telling you because," she stopped, started again. "I'm not going to be that here. I won't do it. If something is wrong, I'll say it. If I disagree with you, I'll say that too. I don't know what kind of marriage you're expecting, but it won't be the kind where I make myself small, so the whole thing holds together." She had not planned to say any of that. It was out now, the room was quiet, and she could not tell from his expression what he would do with it. Nathaniel Harwick looked at his wife. He was thinking of her that way, deliberately, consciously, as his wife, and felt something settle in his chest that had been restless for a very long time. "Good," he said. "I've had enough of careful." January was different. It was not transformed overnight. Life doesn't work that way. and they were both people who had learned through experience that things built quickly tend to fall the same way. But something had shifted, some fundamental arrangement, and the careful distance that had structured the first months began to give way to something less managed and more real. She started coming to the study in the evenings, not to sit in performance of a companionable marriage, but because she had found his books interesting and had opinions about them that she no longer kept to herself. He had, it turned out, a dry and unpredictable humor that emerged once he stopped performing composure, and it delighted her, the way you're delighted by something you had no expectation of finding. He started asking her, genuinely, what she thought about the estate decisions, about the letter from his business partner that was causing him grief, about whether he had handled the situation with the tenant on the north property correctly. He didn't always take her counsel. Sometimes they argued. Not cruelly, but with the particular energy of two people who have discovered that the other one is actually worth the effort of a real disagreement. She was still learning the shape of him. She suspected she would be for years. In February, Rosalind wrote again. This letter was different, longer, less efficient. It did not open with the self-administered facts of her wellness and situation. It opened with, I have been thinking about what you said, and I believe you were right to say it, and I want you to know that I understand why you did. Delia read this sentence 3 times. Rosalind went on. She had been, she wrote, selfish. Not in the summarizing way of someone completing an apology, but in the slower, more uncomfortable way of someone who had actually sat with a thing and turned it over. She had not, she admitted, thought of what it would mean for Delia. She had thought about what she needed, and she had done what she needed, and she had assumed the rest would sort itself, the way it always does, because you are always the one sorting it, and I never said thank you for that, not once. Delia put the letter down, picked it up, finished it. At the end, Rosalind asked if they could write. Not come, she wasn't asking for that yet, knew it wasn't time, but correspond. She wanted to know Delia, not the version she had always taken for granted, the one who managed quietly in the background. She wanted to know the actual one. I am beginning to suspect, Rosalind wrote, that she is considerably more interesting than I gave her credit for. Delia was at the breakfast table when she finished reading it, and Nathaniel was across from her with the newspaper, and she must have made sound, or her face must have changed in some visible way, because he lowered the paper and looked at her. Rosalind, she said. Good news or bad, she considered. I think it might be both, she said. I think it might be the beginning of something that's going to take a long time and I'm not sure where it ends. Those things usually are, he said. Are you going to write back? She thought about the frozen garden in December, the letter she had written entirely on her own terms. She thought about the fire in the parlor on Christmas Eve, and what she had said, and what he had said back. She thought about what it meant to be known, not managed, not arranged, not deployed, but actually known as the full complicated person you were. Yes, she said, but in my own time. Nathaniel nodded and returned to the newspaper. Under the table, his hand found hers briefly, without ceremony or announcement, just the quiet press of it, here, present, holding on. She turned the letter over in her other hand and looked at her sister's handwriting, that looping, unapologetic script, and felt the strange coexistence of things that don't resolve neatly. Love that had been taken for granted, anger that was slowly composting into something less sharp, and the tentative, improbable beginning of a different kind of story between them. Not the one where Rosalind blazed and Delia absorbed. A different one, with better rules. Outside the window, the first suggestion of February thaw had arrived. A softening in the light, a loosening in the air, the world remembering that it knew how to do something other than hold itself frozen. Delia Harwick, and she thought of herself that way now, had started to, without noticing the moment it had changed, folded the letter, set it beside her plate, and reached for her coffee. There was a great deal still to figure out. She found, somewhat to her own surprise, that she was not afraid of that.